afternoon and welcome to the Athens Planning Commission meeting. It is Thursday, March 2nd at about 12:03. We've got a large audience today, and for good reason. Today we're going to start the meeting with the Community Development Implementation Strategy, CDIS public meeting. And I've got an agenda, and I know that Patty Whitmer has slides that we're going to go through, so hopefully our viewing audience, as well as those of you who are here today, just follow along with me. I'm not going to read these in detail. You guys can read them yourselves. I'll just kind of highlight the important elements. So again, let's jump into the next slide, Patty. There we go, and that's the agenda. So we're going to just go through the background of the CDBG funded project list, the different programs, LMI eligibility, so everyone has a firm understanding as to who is eligible and who is not, and then the project selection or suggestions. Next slide. So this comes through ODOD, Ohio Department of Development. And this is for the community development, the Office of Community Development receives the funding from the U.S. Department of Housing. This comes through HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Next slide. These are projects both completed and in progress that you can see. So it's 2011 up through 2018. One thing worth noting is that in there in 2014 was a critical infrastructure program, and I'll get in a little bit more detail as to what that means, the remainder allocation. And then in those that are in progress, 2020, we had an allocation. This is the West Washington Street safety improvements, which is sidewalk repairs, and we have recently, through City Council, council members, President Chris Nisley, who's here today, as well as Councilmember Sam Crowell, authorized an expansion of that project, which is great. Working on sidewalks on Schaefer. Critical infrastructure, this is the wastewater treatment plant dewatering. And you may note that the critical infrastructures, if you look at the amounts, they're significantly higher than allocation. Allocation is set. They come in 2-year rounds at about $150,000. 2022 allocation, which is the Columbus Road lift station, again, what we're looking at. So next slide.
Sir, I have a comment on this slide specifically, if you don't mind.
Thank
you, sir. So just for the members of the viewing audience, this particular slide, so if you look at completed projects, just because it says that dollar amount is assigned to that completed project doesn't mean that's what that project cost. That's just how much CDBG money went into that project. Many of those projects cost 5 to 10 times what is shown there. It's just there's about a little smidgen of it basically that's been paid for by the CDBG. Likewise with that dewatering equipment going at the wastewater treatment plant, it says $500,000 on here. That sounds like a lot, but that's a $3.5 million project. So it's just a portion of what ultimately things cost. I thought that's important to note.
That is. Thank you. So the different programs, we have the Community Development Program, we have the Economic Development Loan and Public Infrastructure Grant, and then the Flexible Grant. Flexible Grant was the Targets of Opportunity. So it's changed its name in what that is, and we'll get into a little bit more detail. Patty, if you want to go to the next slide. The allocation grants, again, these are projects for public facilities, public services, housing, economic development, neighborhood revitalization. These are all the ones that fall under, again, the community development, neighborhood revitalization grants, as well as critical infrastructure grants. And as was said, we have applied every year since 2011 with the allocations, the critical infrastructure. Again, we've applied several times for that and have been successful. Those you can be awarded up to $500,000 with that. Next slide. The Economic Development Loan and Public Infrastructure Program has the Economic Development Loan Program, up to $500,000. The Economic Development Public Infrastructure Grant Program, again, $500,000 cap, and then the Residential Public Infrastructure Grant Program at $750,000. Very competitive. I don't even believe that we have applied for that in the past. I don't know that we've applied for any of these in the past, but certainly worth looking into. Next slide. And then finally, this is the flexible grant program where you can see the different categories there, economic and community development flex grant, the downtown building flex grant program, and the new one this year is the New Horizons Fair Housing Assistance Program. This is a set aside. Next slide, please. Just to dive a little bit into LMI, the data and eligibility, again, based on the low to moderate income within the different census tracts, census blocks within the city of Athens. You want to go to the next slide, Patty? To be eligible, it has to be and have an LMI of 51% or greater. So these are the different blocks in the city, or census tracts. Patty, if you want to jump to the next one. And what you see here, everything that is in the green and light green on the maps are below 50. Everything that you see that is orange or yellowish or whatever color you're seeing right now, all the way up to red, those are LMI eligible tracts in the city. Next slide. Again, a little bit further breakout of the HUD data. Next slide. This is what I think everyone's come to see, the project suggestions. So for critical infrastructure, we have one identified project, which is the Columbus Road Lift Station. Then for allocation, we're looking at possibly North Hill drainage improvements, Lancaster, Columbia sidewalks, citywide sidewalk grinding. This is the milling of areas where the sidewalk has heaved up and is creating a ADA accessibility challenge. Citywide curb ramp improvements, Arts West accessibility improvements. I believe these would also be under allocation. The ones that don't have allocation next to them, those are new ones that came in within the past couple days. Playground accessibility improvements. The cat shelter and upgrades to the county dog shelter is included in here. Accessibility improvements to public offices, businesses. Again, this was an idea that came forward. And then the last thing is a lead service line mapping for the city of Athens. We are open to other thoughts that individuals may have. And if anybody has a suggestion and want to come up to the dais or up to the podium quickly, state your name, your address, and what your thoughts are on additions to the project list. Don't everybody rush the podium, please. Okay. President Nisley.
Chris Nisley, Athens City Council. More a question on process. So I notice you have 4 suggestions for the allocation. Are you going to be prioritizing those rankings, submitting for all of them, or just a few of them?
Probably prioritizing them based upon greatest need and also success of being funded. This is something where we probably work closely with Glenn Crippen at HAPCAP to help us identify projects that would really fill the true need with that allocation funding.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
I actually have a question. And this is a question for the audience, specifically for Mr. Crippen, since we're here. I think the last time we met about this, there was discussion that Ohio Department of Development was going to do away with the allocation funding, and that they no longer were going to make that available for communities. So as we plan in the ensuing years, should we expect that money not to be available any longer?
No, I do believe at this time we can expect the allocation funding to be available in perpetuity biannually. So it's changing leadership up there, and it's great news for us.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn,
Thank
for
you.
bringing that up. Because, within the circles that I engage with, most importantly, the Mayor's Partnership for Progress, hearing from some of the smaller villages to lose allocation would have a substantial negative impact.
Absolutely. It's been a vital source of funding for small projects that simply can't or won't get funded anywhere else. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you. Sam Crowell, 4 Sunnyside Drive. I don't have a project to add to the list, but I wanted to ask a clarification about one of the projects. North Hill drainage improvements. We know that there's a number of issues on that side of town, and I was wondering if this is specific to North Congress or to Madison Avenue or to neither?
I'll start, and then if our Engineering and Public Works Department members who are here in the audience have anything to add. We know that the North Hill in the city of Athens has a number of natural springs that end up creating challenges over time, and so there is no specific location. We just know that those challenges come up from time to time, and we need to go and try to deal with those. We could probably spend $3 million at least, and not tackle all of the various problems there. So this is not a correction. One round of allocation won't do very much, but it is something. If there's an acute problem, we could apply this towards that. And again, to Mr. Crippen's point, that an area that and a problem that wouldn't be necessarily eligible for any other funding source, external funding source other than our own local funds would be the situation. I don't know if
Thank
Jessica,
you,
if you
Mr.
had
Stone.
anything on that, or Solly, if you had anything on that. Okay.
Chris Schmiel, and I'm here as a member of the Farmers Market. And I didn't know if Farmers Market permanent facility would be a type of project that would fall under any of this.
Let me pose, if you would, we'll pose that question to Glenn Crippen and see, Glenn, is what amenities for a farmer's market, especially one that is sitting on public property?
Yeah, it's quite possible. We'd have to look at the details. What we have to analyze is who is benefiting from the improvement. If the beneficiaries of the investment are LMI, we have more wiggle room with the funding requests. So that is something that could be taken a look at, and that fact that it's on public property would be better. So it's something we should explore if that's an interest of the city.
Commissioner Stone just pointed out that it is in a non-LMI eligible census tract within the city. The whole East State Street corridor is well below the 51%. So it would not be eligible, unfortunately. Or fortunately.
So to follow up on what you said, though, can it be located geographically outside of an LMI census tract if the primary beneficiary is a LMI group?
Yes. Really, the argument could be made that the beneficiaries would be the whole city and or the whole county. The Athens County is the only county in the state that as a whole, by HUD data, is over 51% LMI. So Athens County is in a unique investment CDBG situation, and as is the city. So even though the East State census tracts are below 51%, if we make a case in the grant application that the beneficiaries are a group of, or a geographical set of data that is over 51%, we'll be okay. So it's all about the service area and who benefits, who truly benefits. And the state will look at that very closely as we apply. So
Very good. Thank you for that input on that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schmiel, do you want to expound on any of the ideas that you had for the farmers market site?
Well, I mean, we do a lot with SNAP recipients, so I think we could gather a fair amount of data that would maybe support, we have a lot of customers that would be in the LMI category. I mean, I think that study that was done a couple years ago with the public places or people for whatever it was called, like that was like a vision that was created, with the city, and but then the pandemic hit, right? And so things kind of got, but hey, now the farmer's market is on city property. So, I mean, as far as expounding beyond that, just hoping it happens. That's it.
Great, thank you. Unless there's any other questions that hopefully we get answers for, then I am going to call the public meeting for the CDIS as being completed. So thank you for those of you who attended to hear about that or to give input to the CDIS. Moving on, we have our regular planning session for today, so going to be calling the meeting to order. Anyone who is wishing to speak before the Planning Commission today, is there anybody here who's going to speak to any of the items on the agenda? Okay. Or make comment on anything that's on the agenda? Okay. Thank you, Patty. All right, I feel like we've gone through shift change. For those of you who are in here today and wishing to speak before council, if you would raise your right hand, and do you solemnly swear that everything you're going to present today before the Planning Commission is truthful and honest? Great, thank you. Disposition of the February 2nd, 2023 meeting minutes.
I will propose that they be accepted as presented.
In a second, any comments, changes, corrections? Hearing none, all in favor of adopting signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Abstain.
And an abstention. Thank you, Director Stone. Cases. We have one case before us today. This is case 23-01. This is Title 41, 960 East State Street, Commercial Development, Chipotle and Starbucks. Director Riggs, do you want to tee this up for us?
Thank you, Mayor, members of Planning Commission. Staff has had a chance to review the updated site development plans for this project. It's about 2.7 acres. It contains two separate buildings, a Starbucks and a Chipotle proposed, two access points. As you can look through, I did, and I apologize for this, but I did provide you comments, but just at the very last minute. So if I could go through those real quick. The proposed design does meet all of the city's zoning setbacks, use parking improvement cover, et cetera. The landscaping plan that we received is a little bit shy. We need some additional trees, and there's a proposal for 11 trees in the city right-of-way. Staff feels that might become a site distance problem for us, and we would not recommend that those be located there. We'd like the developer to relocate some of those trees, and then we can talk to them about the additional trees required. Reviewed the photometric plans, and I noticed some minor light trespass on the west property line and on the east property line. That can be corrected with either shielding or readjusting the proposed lights there, so we'd ask them to review that. Fire chief had comments about vehicle access on the southwest access point. I've reviewed that with the city engineer, and we think that during an emergency situation, there is acceptable access to be able to get onto that property with a fire vehicle. The police chief didn't have any comments. The city engineer had some questions or concerns about interior traffic circulation and how that might reflect onto East State Street. So I'd like the developer to coordinate with that office for some additional information. looked at the existing storm sewer. The existing sewer on the street has adequate capacity to pick up all the flows, we think. I would like to ask that the developer look at picking up the flows of the west property line, if he hasn't done that, to put that into the storm sewer so we don't end up, sometimes in the wintertime, we get runoff that causes icing problems there, and this would help solve that problem. There will be additional stormwater quality measures, but we can address that at the land development piece if you don't want to do that here at Planning Commission. I looked at the existing sanitary sewer there is in the southwest corner, a gravity sewer. Would note that there's a pressure force main in front of the site that they would not be able to tie into, but it looks like they can tie into that existing sanitary sewer, and it would be adequate for the site. Would note that the plans still show off-site easements, and I'd want the developer to please verify that he has obtained those easements. And we're going to recommend a geotech inspection company to be on site during the construction of the proposed retaining walls. We think that will help everybody in this situation. We've got some kind of outside review. And then the neighbor located north of this property had some comments or concerns, and Barbara Stout, and she has addressed those in an email to me on March the 1st, yesterday. I've attached that.
Would anyone who's here today want to speak to this project from the firm that's applying for this?
Sure. Ladies and gentlemen of the commission, thanks for having us. My name is Jared Decker. I'm the real estate director for the PM company. Happy to address these however we'd like. If we want to go through in order, talk about them, whatever's most beneficial. I'd say in general, David gave me these when we came in, and we will get with our engineer of record, who's here today, Mark Welch from Pickering, and we will have these comments built into and addressed certainly before the meeting on the 16th, I believe. But if there are specific questions, I'm happy to answer them, one of which is the easement, the temporary construction easement. So we were unable to get that easement from the neighbor above us. So what we did was pulled the wall down 6 feet, brought our LOD down correspondingly, and can now stay off of her property. And that drawing does not show that, but we'll get that to you here directly. We were out in the hall reviewing these comments. I think everything you've shown here we can speak to and certainly address on our next turn. But again, any particular specific questions, happy to answer those for you, or have Mark answer them if I can't.
Questions from the commissioners?
I have a couple. So speaking of offsite easements, I know you just addressed the construction easement and how you dealt with that, so you didn't have to go north of the property in order to build that wall. The site plan shows 18-foot wide, I think I'm reading that correctly, 18-foot wide easement per OR 483/1755. I'm assuming that's some sort of shared access easement between the apartment building next door and the western side of this site. Can you speak to the specifics and what's granted and who's granted what access via that particular easement?
It's the apartments and then the two houses above our site.
Okay.
One on the left side, and then Miss Barbara Stout's house directly above our property.
Gotcha. And so that easement is against your property?
It's on our property is encumbered by that.
Encumbered by that particular
Yes,
easement?
sir.
Is there anything, because there is like a few feet there, well, I guess there's not much, but there's a few feet external to your property before you get to the edge of that building. Do you have any encumbrance on that property next door?
No, sir.
So this is purely theirs, and you believe that 18-foot access is sufficient for getting onto the west side or that west drive there?
I do. That access, the easement's 18 feet, but the access point for our traffic actually expands a little bit more to the east and gets you closer to 22 feet, I believe is what Mark told me this morning.
And you're in right away once you get down into the throat of that, so, yep. Okay, very good, understand. My second question has to do with the sanitary sewer specifically, and I think I noted through, my concerns, just because of my knowledge of the system out there, that there is no gravity sanitary in the front of the property. The gravity sanitary starts at the southwest corner of the property. Did you validate the elevations that you can actually get into that via gravity?
Yes.
Okay, okay, super. That's good to hear. Okay.
Commissioner Bain? You looked like you had a question.
I always have a question.
I know you do.
One of the things that Barbara Stout wrote in her email was that she was concerned about the number of people using that relatively narrow access road. I was wondering if you would consider widening that a little bit, because it would be in your interest too. I actually went up that hill to her, almost her house. I didn't see her there, but I went up there. I was pretty amazed at how steep it is and the rest.
It is.
And, I mean, you don't have to make all things better, but that would certainly be one that you could improve by widening the street, especially in that traffic zone. We're gonna have quite a few left-hand turns into that place and people coming and going. I assume it's gonna be that good.
I assume so, and I assume also that you're referring to widening
Yes.
the curb cut onto East State Street. I don't know that can be done, or whether it can or not. I'm sure we can maybe add a foot there, or.
I thought you engineers could do anything. What's the matter?
Well, I don't know. We have to just put a pencil to that and see if we've got the room there as it, pertains to the utility locations and all that good stuff that's
It
right
would
there.
help remedy the issues that the people could have in that area being held up by your fabulous accomplishment. And then, yet, your users won't be impatient to get back to work.
Right. And we're also hopeful that with the addition of that second curb cut onto the property, the primary goal there was to lighten the load on each access point. So we're hoping that's a visible, tangible benefit as well to
My other question is probably a bit more impertinent, but I was wondering if you couldn't extend the wall a bit so there isn't a place where people can say, good heavens, that's gonna direct water
Sure.
onto. I mean, I know you call it a Lamborghini of, it must be, looking at that slope and the rest.
Right.
But I was wondering if there wasn't some way you could find it in your heart or in your pocketbook to expand the wall so it's over everything, if I believe I don't know if it'll work, but if it works, you have to believe it works.
I believe it works. Our engineers believe it works as shown.
Yeah, what about her streams that come through that area?
Can you just go over her email if you don't mind?
Absolutely,
Just,
sure.
Yeah, if you can just go point it out,
Sure.
I think that'd be easier to just address her
Sure.
concerns for us. Thank you.
So we'll take them in order here. Number one, there's history of slippage on the hills. Obviously, we got the wall in there to deal with that. The reason the wall stops where it does is because our engineers say that that's sufficient to hold the hill. To double down and sort of belt and suspenders, Ms. Stout's, issue is we've given her $2 million of commercial general liability insurance. So we're basically putting our money where our mouth is there and says, hey, if we create a problem, you're covered, we're covered, and we hope, we kind of think that's the goodwill of hey, we're in it together.
Could we ask them, how long, will this liability persist for 6 months, a year, not at all?
The timing, I don't know what the specific timing is, so I don't want to misspeak.
We asked for 1 year, I think.
1 year?
After
When you're in
construction is
the-
complete. Yep.
After completion of construction.
Okay, so
But if something's gonna slip, it's gonna slip in that first year.
Right.
unless it's a different year with
Well,
lots of water.
how is the engineer able to say they don't believe there's gonna be any problem there when I don't believe there were any soil samples taken there in that other area? There were soil samples taken in 10 or so locations, but not to the west of that property on that slope.
Sure. So my name is Mark Welch. I'm with Pickering Associates, the engineering firm for these guys. So using the soil data that is in that area from all the soil borings, I believe we had 10 soil borings. That gives us basically the general information of the type of soils that are
prevalent in that area. And then specifically to the west side where you're referring about where the wall stops, that area, our proposed grading plan has that slope at a 4-to-1 slope, which is significantly flatter than what it is currently. And a combination of knowing the soil type plus making that slope flatter, we don't believe a wall is warranted. And we did a global stability analysis of the wall and of the entire site to see what factor of safety we have, and we exceed all factors of safety with the wall and without the wall on that west end. And so that's how we feel it's not warranted.
But you're going to move water from behind the wall down through that area.
Correct. We have a diversion ditch at the top of the wall that will collect all water from the wall and above, and it will go around on both sides.
Correct.
Of the entire property. So that gets that water off of that slope, which again is helps stabilize that slope in the long term.
But will it not cause problems in the area that we're talking about, the western portion where you're regrading that and there's no wall?
No, sir, because we have a diversion ditch, and then we collect that diversion ditch into a catch basin, which is then all piped underneath through the parking lot areas and so forth. So we move the water and then we catch it and treat it before it's released.
Is the retaining wall going to be built without disturbing any of the soil any more than's already been disturbed? I.e., those piers or columns, concrete columns that are with steel encased, they will be put in, drilled, put in place before any of the soil is moved?
Essentially, there'll be a little bit of soil movement just to be able to get access for the construction equipment on there to do the work. But beyond that, the first method of construction is to construct the wall. Once the wall is in place, then the soil gets cut down to make room for the buildings. So the wall is there to stabilize it so that we can do construction plus just build in longevity and stabilize the slope.
A question for Officer Riggs. You talked about having an engineer on site full-time while the wall's going in, basically reporting to the city?
Yes, sir, that's what we prefer. Not necessarily an engineer, but a geotech inspector.
Okay.
That's qualified to be able to look at, they do this all the time, look at the construction work and verify that they're following the plans, that there aren't any issues associated with it. We really think this will help everybody involved.
Okay.
So
And they would the developer pay for that, but they would report to the city? Or how's that going to be done?
There's several methods to do this. One would be to ask the developer to provide an inspector for that. We also have the ability to hire our own and then back charge the developer for that. I don't know that we've got into that detail yet.
Okay.
Can I speak to that? We've also got plans already coordinated and established to do that exact same thing. So a geotechnical engineer will be on site during the construction of the wall, and then also from my office, either myself or another professional engineer from Pickering will be on site during that construction at the same time. And so there will be somebody there to monitor, to ensure that the depths are correct, that the construction is being done in accordance with the drawings, and then to address anything that happens to come up during construction that needs addressed.
I got one more question for the developer regarding the curb cuts again. What did you go through as a part of the planning process for this and decide that there wasn't a need for 2 lanes exiting the property, one left, one right? Did you do some kind of analysis like that? And you feel this is a better situation than if particularly the one curb cut in the middle of the property would be wider, where you could have 2 lanes exiting, so that maybe traffic wouldn't back up quite as much.
Traffic into the site.
Well, I'm more concerned about trying to get traffic out of there and the cars being stacked up because somebody's making a left-hand turn.
Right.
And, the lines aren't moving, at certain times. I don't know if the Starbucks would be like that more than anything else, but it just seems, I just wondered if you did some kind of an analysis and felt the situation was better. I quite frankly, I got mixed emotions because I believe that, pedestrians on the sidewalk there, with 3 lanes, three slots, 1 in, 2 out, it would be more challenging than maybe just the 2, but I just curious as to how you may, I just think it'll be, everything's so close to the road, and the discharge, like the one on that common driveway, the cars are coming out of Starbucks and they're making an immediate turn. You've got traffic maybe coming from the apartments and
Sure.
it just seems complicated and I don't know. I liked your first plan where the drive coming out of Starbucks was back up the property a ways.
Right.
Because then that gives you more stack room and stuff and maybe, but just a thought, just talk about that a little if you could, about how we ended up like we did.
Sure. So we started with 1 curb cut with 1 lane in and 1 lane out, which is sort of the default. That's what's there today. Then when there were some rumblings from the city about maybe excess load on that existing curb cut. And so our answer was maybe we could have widened that or expanded that initial curb cut, but we instead added a second full access curb cut to try to mitigate any of those issues that you're referring to. There wasn't we didn't retain a traffic engineer to say, this is the way that, it can be done, or A, B, or C. We thought it was sufficient on the original plan with the 1 curb cut. So we thought the second access point was over and above to solve any concerns that would have maybe been prevalent with one point of access. And we've also provided the, I'm going to say this wrong, but it's the traffic generation data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Yes. The Institute of Traffic Engineers puts out a manual on suspected loads based on use categories, and we've submitted that as well for review, and I believe it was well under that 100 cars an hour. Yes, 100 cars an hour.
I mean, I can't imagine this is gonna have much more traffic than Taco Bell, the hotel, and Shade, you know what I mean?
Well,
Because of how these, as he mentioned last meeting, Chipotle will be heavier in the afternoon and evening, and Starbucks will be in the morning, so
I
thinking
think
about
that's a positive.
that
I agree.
analogy, I would think that.
I just might, I have been to the credit union just a couple doors down and tried to make a left-hand turn out of there. And you essentially have to go across 2, or you could say, you could turn into the turn lane, and it just can be pretty challenging, and with little room to stack the traffic there, coming out, you got somebody wanting to make a left-hand turn, you've got maybe a lot of frustrated people behind trying to make a right-hand turn or wanting to make a right-hand turn. I do think the two entrance and egresses are good, but I'm still a little concerned about that.
The other thing I think it'll help, and certainly you can probably point to some set of circumstances where this isn't the case, but the majority of the customers of these 2 buildings theoretically are leaving there and turning right. Unless they're going to one of the few stores to the left, to the east, I guess it would be. I think your supply chain would dictate that the vast majority of these people are turning right, headed back to work, to school, to home. So hopefully that's a help as well.
Would there be any benefit, Director Stone, or Director Riggs, like at Kroger, you can only turn right? Would it make sense for the new curb cut to only turn right, and then the main road, obviously, to be left or right? So what I'm thinking is, obviously, if there is somebody that's taking forever to turn, they could go to this main entrance that they're cutting, and then it's a right turn only. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I do.
I mean, that could alleviate and honestly be probably better, but from safety.
Difficult to implement that, to be able to force somebody to do that if they want to turn left out of there, and you got a sign that says no left turn, or if you've got a little turtle there that they'll drive over it. So actually saying it and making them do it are two different things.
Yeah.
And actually, it would be better to have that situation on the common driveway. Because if you've got people from the apartments wanting to make a left-hand turn to get out of town, you know, then they have to drive across the front of,
Yeah.
you know, the restaurants, and so.
Yeah, no, I was thinking more it'd be
Yeah.
on the restaurant main side that would be right turn only, to your point, so people coming out of the apartments could take a left or a right, but it's just an idea, I mean,
I have a point on that. Having implemented several attempts at left turn only on East State Street and failed miserably, I know that people generally do what they want to do in that area. I appreciate you providing the trip generation analysis. I don't know that I buy this particular model because of number of seats, given that both of these restaurants are probably going to be very heavy drive-through customers versus, you know, number of seats being the indicator. But this is the official publication, so, you know, 60 trips an hour out of this during peak hour, you know, 1 trip per minute. I don't think it's too onerous. It might grow a little bit from that, but I don't think it's too onerous for this location. I'd be more concerned if we were west of Walmart. Be very hesitant to introduce any new curb cuts west of Walmart, particularly for fast food, without a full-blown traffic impact study. We didn't ask them to do a traffic impact study on this. We just asked them to provide us the, you know, at least their basis for trip generation for their design. So I'm comfortable enough, based upon provision of this and the way that they've laid it out, to say that this will be okay.
That's interesting. Not that this is material in any way, but we've certainly sat around the office and think, can you get through there in a minute? You know, that seems quick.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's really moving cars through. I don't know. I know if I've ever bought a cup of coffee in under a minute and been back on the road, you know, so.
But it's Starbucks.
Yeah, hey, maybe. I did want to address the other 2 points in Ms. Stout's email, as you requested. The springs, I think Mark talked about those. And I guess we sort of de facto talked about number 3, the driveway as well. And widening that driveway from maybe 22 feet to whatever's there, and seeing if that's a possibility. So I've got that noted on my to-do list as well.
do you have any idea what how much the worst flow of the seasonal springs are? I guess you wouldn't, because you just
do
use
not.
the,
But
I
we're
mean,
gonna
that
pick it
could
all up.
overwhelm your storm sewer practically, right?
I'd have to defer to Mark on those capture calculations.
Yeah, so we're capturing the majority of the water on site. Some of the water that's going off site before construction will remain that way. The spring flow, if there are springs in there, I do not believe that they would overrun our stormwater system. We have a lot of capacity in that system. We're actually doing an underground storm tech chamber system to store all that extra water and the runoff, and so there's quite a bit of capacity there if needed. And then during construction, if they do find those springs in the hillside, they will put in a trench system to daylight that water out of that soil area to help keep that slope stable.
And divert it to where?
To our diversion ditch that then
To the
goes
diversion
to
ditch
a
that will
catch
take it,
basin that
capture.
goes to our storm system, yes.
You'll have to forgive me for being so picky about this, but I did my initial work on Franklin Grosvenor slip, which slipped a lot.
Okay. Yep,
It was a wake-up call for many of us.
sure.
Okay.
We're all sliding to the river, just depending on how quickly we get there.
Wrong way. Nope, it's not gonna happen.
Any other questions from the commissioners?
thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a comment, you know, some of these statements in here require you to do things after we get out of here and after you gain approval from us. And so, you know, typically what we'll do is, and we'll probably make a motion here shortly to approve it contingent upon following the instructions of the code office and the engineering public works office for those final details. I do want to commend you on figuring out how to do this. So a decade ago, actually more than a decade ago, 15 years ago, during grad school, this, for my civil engineering master's degree, this site was a project for us to look at and do due diligence on development. And basically the takeaway was it's a really hard site to develop for a variety of reasons, which is the reason we've watched it languish for 30 years. So the fact that you've been able to come out here and figure out a way to build something on it, I think speaks to, the skill of the engineer there, so.
Just keep it there.
Well, we appreciate that, and really, we would turn the tables on you and say that, you guys have created an environment around town that our clients want to be in. Without them, we'd have moved on a long while ago, but they want to be here, so here we are. So I think that's a two-way street for that.
Sir, I would make a motion to approve development contingent upon following the instructions laid out in the memo by Director Riggs, by him and the engineering public works staff.
I second that.
I have a first and a second. Any further discussion from the commissioners? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign?
I'm opposed.
Okay. It passes.
If I may, David, what do we do here? Do
So
we
the next steps, once this is approved and the minutes are done, you'll need to come back to us for a zoning permit, a land development permit, you don't need a curb cut, floodplain. You'll have to come back for us for a few permits. And then we'll go through that process. It'll be pretty quick since we've got most of the information that we need now.
So the March 16th meeting, we do not
You do not need to go to.
Okay.
Done.
So in short, we need to revise these drawings and,
Get them to me.
yes, sir. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Communications, we do not have any. Any other reports? Anything new from you, Director Riggs?
I do not have anything to report to the committee.
Okay. And I've not received anything from the city planner, Paul Logue, at this time anyway. Opportunity for the citizens to speak on items not covered under the agenda.
Rob Delac, live on Morris Avenue here in the city. Something, I'm going to do this off the cuff, so we'll see how this goes. It's been mentioned before, when proposed zone changes or changes to the city code were proposed recently, that they didn't include a change in or not change, but to create a definition for eating and drinking establishments in the city code. That has come up before the Board of Zoning Appeals, which I serve on for the city repeatedly as an issue. There's not a definition in the code, and I was hoping that we would see that as part of the sort of package of proposals that are before City Council now. And that didn't come forward with those, and I just want to bring that up as something to not forget really I think needs to be done, is to review and determine what the definition should be of an eating and drinking establishment in the city code, so that's clarified. We recently had a lawsuit that you're, I'm sure, very familiar with. I don't know any details on it, except that that was one of the main sticking points for the whole lawsuit, was that definition, and there was no real definition, so a judge decided. So I think it is worth the effort for the city to clarify that and put it in the code. So just a reminder to pick that up when you can, please. Thanks.
Director Riggs.
I would like to respond to that. Debbie Walker, the clerk of council, and I are working on revising all the definitions in a codified ordinance from Title I to Title 99. And that's a big task, but we're working on that. So we will have a new set of definitions that better matches the code that we currently have.
Wonderful. Is that helpful? All right. Any other comments? All right, announcements and other business. We'll be meeting again March 16th at noon here in council chambers. And on that note, get a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
A second. All in favor signify by saying aye.